and now we begin the education portion. The official AGM is now over, and now it's the informative. Jack, not saying that the AGM isn't informative, but this will be a touch more informative. So now we have the great honor of introducing a very special guest. We have the Minister of Mental Health and Addictions in the room here today. And I was absolutely thrilled that Minister Whiteside decided to join us today. Minister Whiteside attended our event in May, for those of you that attended the play, Eye of the Storm. And the minister's dedication started then, and it has continued. Minister Whiteside is dedicated. It comes across loud and clear in her continued dedication, her loyalty, and the fact that she is attending our AGM here today on a Saturday afternoon. And I applaud you and I commend you for your commitment, for your dedication to show your support to all BCSS families, and all BC families across our province. So Minister Whiteside, thank you for taking the time to be here today. The floor is yours.
Oh, well, Phaedra, thanks very much for that really lovely, warm welcome. And I applaud all of you, not only for being here on a Saturday afternoon, but for all of the work, incredible work that I know that you do day in and day out to support your loved ones who are living with mental health issues. So it's a real pleasure to be here today on the traditional territory of the Musqueam peoples. And thanks very much for the invitation to come and spend a little bit of time with you. And thanks to Phaedra and the team at the BC Schizophrenia Society for bringing us together, and also for bringing Dr. Agarwal to come and speak. I'm really looking forward to hearing his talk. And of course, Garrett, it's always a real pleasure to see you, and I hope we have a chance to catch up before I have to leave. And Jack, really nice to see you again as well. I know that you're celebrating 40 years of the incredible work that you've been doing, and this year. And it was a real honor to come and spend time with you in May as well at the play Eye of the Storm, and see the premiere of that play. And I have to say, it's something that I think about often and that I reflect on a lot. The experiences that were so eloquently depicted in that work. And, you know, I think that what you're doing is so important. It's so important around taking on the stigma that we know people who are living with serious mental health challenges experience in their daily lives. And it is so important that when people have those experiences, like the young girl in that play, that they to make that care more accessible, to normalize how we talk about these issues is, I think that work is more important than ever. And so, you know, from the perspective of government, you know, the hope that you have provided to thousands of families all over BC is really important. And I think I shared with you in May just the personal story of my own family. When I was really little, we had a member of our family who struggled with schizophrenia, and we didn't have your organization. We didn't have a community of support, and we didn't have very, very good care in the healthcare system really to help take care of her. And so not only was that part of our family kind of adrift and struggling with the situation, but it didn't provide the kind of community of support and care that my family member needed and deserved, frankly. And so I think about that a lot too. And I think about how far we've come thanks to, in good part, the work that you've been doing over the last number of years. And that extends so importantly to the caregivers. Caregivers and peers are absolutely key in everything that we are doing. We really value in government and in the Ministry of Mental Health and Addictions, we really value the partnership and the relationship that we have with you. And I was really, really pleased that we were able to make the investment, the $5 million investment in your organization and to support the work that you're doing, because in particular, we want to be able to support the expansion of this support to people who are living in more rural and remote communities who don't have access to the kind of support that we know that they need. And we're also, continuing to work and build on work that we've done with Indigenous partners so that programs also better meet the needs of their communities. And really importantly, of course, working with youth and upstream interventions and new avenues of care, like the intervention for psychosis and for more stable housing options, which is a really key part of things, of course, for people living with schizophrenia. And, as I was, thinking about this event and coming to see you again, I was thinking a lot about a story that I read about from VHA recently, Cameron Webster. Cameron was once a client of Island Health's early psychosis intervention program. And he was living with symptoms of schizophrenia and mood disorders. And through being able to access that program and access care, today he's in a position to help others who are experiencing the same thing. So following his recovery journey, he became a peer support worker in the very same program. And I think that as well, the early psychosis intervention program that we've made a significant in budget 2021, we invested $53 million to be able to scale up and hire healthcare workers, providers, doctors, nurses who can provide that care in all of our health authorities. And I even have heard from people in my own constituency just on the street stopping me saying, "Oh, I just wanted you to know this program is really great. It's working well. It's really helping the young person in my life who was really struggling." So, I think this is, through the work that you do to make the space and highlight the issues that really helps government make the decisions that we need to make sure that we're providing people with the right kind of care. And I just know that the work that is not just is not just important in that regard, but it also really is life-changing, and it can be life-saving. And that is really the message that stuck that hit home with me and that has stayed with me through the eye of the storm. So we're really committed to continuing on with this work, to continuing to support the work that you're doing. So thank you so much for being here on a Saturday afternoon, and I'm really looking forward to hearing Dr. Agarwal. Thanks very much.
As we said earlier, relationships are everything. And it's those comments that really drive that point home. The fact that we have provincial government support in supporting all the work that our educators and our regional managers are doing, people like Hardeep and Catherine and Jennifer in this room. And, it really drives the point. Yeah, so thank you. And I always get emotional talking about it because it's something that we need to keep talking about. And the eye of the storm was a very powerful play to demonstrate the struggles that the individual living with the illness, but also those caring for that individual, that they have to face every single day. But I assure you, BCSS will be here. BCSS will be here to support you any way we can. So thank you, Minister Whiteside. Thank you, Christine Tapp, for being here in person today. It means a lot to all of us. So thank you again to the Minister and the staff. And now we get to hear from our keynote speaker today. We have Dr. Agarwal. Am I saying that correctly? Okay, perfect. I just wanted to double check. And Dr. Agarwal is going to be focusing on the past, present, and the future of schizophrenia. He is going to be talking about the evolving perceptions, where we're at today, and future research. He is going to be looking at inspiring hope, hopefully, driving change, and what we can all do in playing that role to be able to drive the change that we all need and desperately want in this province of ours. A little bit of background on him. It's impressive. He's an associate professor in the Department of Psychiatry at the University of Toronto. He's a clinician-scientist in the schizophrenia division at the Center for Addiction and Mental Health in Toronto. He is also the medical head for clinical research in the schizophrenia division, and he also leads the metabolic clinic and the clozapine clinic at the Center for Addiction and Mental Health. Welcome to the floor. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you for having me. And I mean, I know how I've heard about BCSS and I know how important the work is, but being here present for the AGM and the talk after and sort of experiencing this, it's very humbling because you don't get to see this side often in your clinical work. You're across the table, unfortunately on the side where you're driving conversation and you don't get to see the other side unless you're experiencing these kinds of events and organizations. And so I'm humbled by your work here and how you are supporting what we think we do, except we don't do a lot of it, and there are systemic problems. And perhaps we can address some of that or see how things have evolved in the last few centuries of schizophrenia research. I have a few. So these are my disclosures. I feel passionately about clozapine use, and so HLS Therapeutics provides clozapine in our center, and so I've done talks promoting that. But I have these funding agencies as well that support the research that I do, and I acknowledge their support with a lot of thanks. So these are the objectives today. We'll review the historical aspects, and then we'll quickly see where we are now, and then see what we can do to move into the future and what the near future beholds. I, of course, can't see too far because science is a lot about serendipity as well. And I think we have to be humble to realize that oftentimes solutions come from where we least expect it. But then we can perhaps see what the near future holds and how it might affect schizophrenia treatment going forward. So it's important to remember and to appreciate that schizophrenia is not a new illness. A lot of times when we think about schizophrenia and we talk about the history of schizophrenia, we end up going to Kraepelin. And some of the authors have made what I think is an error to think that schizophrenia is a new illness. And when you start thinking that schizophrenia is a new illness, you think of aspects such as urbanization or a new virus as potential sort of things that cause schizophrenia. Schizophrenia has been around a very long time, and while each of these factors is important and can contribute to its etiology, it is not all. Schizophrenia is very much an illness that is conferred by genetic risk, and those factors have remained sort of constant in the last 100 years. I mean, we evolve daily and continuously as a race, but the last 150 years haven't seen a spike of evolution that would suddenly make an illness appear. So it's a long-standing illness. And if you look into the history, ancient Mesopotamia, India, and Greece had descriptions that matched schizophrenia way before what we think of as the modern history of schizophrenia. And this was, again, in the 12th century and historical accounts in the 15th century and in the 16th century, 17th century. All of these accounts are reasonably in line with what we think of as schizophrenia. The terminology changes, of course, and we'll review a bit of how DSM and other diagnostic manuals have defined schizophrenia over time. But if you're looking at the essence of schizophrenia, which is loss of touch with reality, sometimes lack of insight, and sort of not being able to appreciate what is real and what is imaginary, that common thread has been noticed throughout history, throughout its history that we are aware of. But then more modern times, the history is, of course, dominated by Morell's description, and then Kraepelin came along and defined dementia precox, and then Bleuler in 1908 gave the term schizophrenia. It's also interesting that during that time, schizophrenia was thought of the understanding of schizophrenia was a bit more passive, in the sense that negative symptoms and lack of drive or lack of things was indicative of schizophrenia. Positive symptoms, that the so-called positive symptoms such as hallucinations and delusions, those have become more important recently. earlier they were thought of as secondary phenomenon. And part of it is driven by how we approach illness. And it's also part of how we can approach illness. Our medications primarily target positive symptoms. And so that has become oftentimes our focus, because that is what we can treat. And so that is what we focus on, right? However, the treatment, the illness, if you look at it in the long-term perspective, is guided by the negative symptoms, by the cognitive symptoms. Oftentimes the dysfunction, the social dysfunction and the occupational dysfunction that results from schizophrenia is also driven by negative and cognitive symptoms. Positive symptoms come and go and are treated. And also, we have never, or at least historically, schizophrenia has not been conceptualized as a single entity. It's a group of, Bloller called them a group of schizophrenias, and that was acknowledgement of the fact that it's like saying somebody has a fever, saying somebody has schizophrenia. It's a clinical syndrome, which is a combination of 3 or 4 criteria depending on which time you are in. We don't really understand the biological basis just yet. So there are multiple types of schizophrenias within the umbrella term of schizophrenia. And it is possible, hopefully in future, that we will reach a stage where we are able to, demarcate each of them and have treatments that are focused on each of these types rather than trying to treat all of these disorders as one. So it's like treating all fevers with one drug. We know that doesn't work. I mean, fever has multiple causes. And so schizophrenia also has multiple etiological origins. The big change with schizophrenia started happening in 1950s. And this was when chlorpromazine came into being, which, by the way, was a serendipitous event. They were not looking to discover an antipsychotic. It just so happened that they found that this had antipsychotic properties, and then it was quickly approved for treatment of schizophrenia. And then we had clozapine very soon in 1959, but then it was taken off the market because of the problems with agranulocytosis and death. And then it came back into the market in 1989. And between these two landmark discoveries, there were several molecules that came after. And so it launched an era of psychopharmacology. However, they were not called antipsychotics then. We didn't know that term then. They were called neuroleptics and major tranquilizers. So those were the terminologies we were using then. But then what it did was it ushered in this era of hope. And I can only imagine what it would have been like to be a psychiatrist in 1960s. So you had an illness which you had no answer for, and suddenly there's this drug that makes a lot of people better. And so that drove this process of deinstitutionalization. I mean, a lot of people became better. A lot of people had hope and were able to get reintegrated into the community. And this was really an exciting phase to be in. But then this is not without criticism, of course. I mean, there are arguments, reasonable arguments to be made that deinstitutionalization perhaps has gone too far, or that the idea has gone too far in how it's implemented, and that we have offloaded some of the cost to the community, except we have not buttressed the community with the necessary resources to hold people in community, right? And so you have a lot of individuals who need a lot of support, but don't have that support. I mean, again, BCSS does amazing work providing that support. So, I mean, why should you be providing that support? Why should you exist? If we had the perfect medication, if we could take away all the symptoms, the society could perhaps focus on other things, rather than providing family education and support. I mean, it's because those factors are lacking that society needs to exist and this work needs to exist and so on. So we don't really have the perfect solution. And that has been the story of schizophrenia. We take a step forward, but then it does not solve all of it because our biological understanding of the illness suffers. And so it's sort of intertwined, and the biology follows society, follows biology, and so on. And 1980s were also exciting because while we were still on a high with this treatment, I mean, and we are feeling good about these treatments, we were also discovering modalities by which we could explain why these treatments were working, right? It's nice to have a treatment, but then if you don't know why it's working, it's kind of strange, at least as scientists. We don't know what's happening in the brain. And so imaging came around in 1980s, and we discovered, we started finally calling them antipsychotics. The concept of treatment-resistant schizophrenia came into being, and clozapine's efficacy. And a lot of interesting models came out of that decade. So on the top is a very simplified version of how we understand psychosis. We think that some circuits in the brain are stronger than normal, whatever normal is. And so that drives some of the symptoms, and some of the circuits are weaker. And because of that, we have the cognitive deficits. And antipsychotics work by making sure that the circuits that are hyperactive, they are normalized, right? And so that drives symptom control. Now, this came out in 1980s. We are in 2023. We have more elegant models, but none of those elegant models explain treatment, unfortunately. So those new models have not yet led to demonstrable treatments. And again, there are some new hopes. We'll come to that. But overall, we are still stuck in a model that came 50 years ago, and we have not been able to move past that. There were some also interesting, so the images below demonstrate what we think of positive schizophrenia, negative schizophrenia. So positive symptoms where something new is happening, and negative symptoms where a function of the brain is taken away. And so some of the authors tried to use brain imaging to find that the negative schizophrenia had brain deficits that were irreversible, whereas the schizophrenia that was more treatable was positive symptoms. Again, this was oversimplification, but those were helpful, somewhat helpful constructs in that time that have guided the thought process since. And then I'm very proud of this slide because this came out of University of Toronto. All of this work is University of Toronto. My mentor was involved, Gary Remington and Kshitij Kapoor and Seaman. They were just amazing. They are amazing people. And they finally found the reason why antipsychotics work in the brain and sort of the thresholds of how antipsychotics work. And they found during 1990s that all antipsychotics bind to this D2 receptor in the brain. And you don't have a drug which is an antipsychotic, which is not a dopamine binder. Again, it's changing now, but for all these 50 years, if there's a drug which is an antipsychotic, it binds to the D2 receptor. And they were also able to show that you need about 60 to 70% blockade of the receptor to achieve antipsychotic efficacy. So for the first time, we were in a position to say why the drug worked and also to what extent you need to dose people so that the drug worked. And this work led to about a 10-fold decrease in the average dose. People were dosing individuals with antipsychotics at a much, much higher dose, and this drove it down. And this led to some reduction in side effects and sort of better understanding and better appreciation of what we need to effectively treat individuals with schizophrenia. And so I consider this a landmark sort of progress in the history of how we treat schizophrenia. Sorry, 1 second. Yeah, okay. But then in 2000s, in this decade, we slowly started to realize that all was not well. I mean, in those 30 years, we had a number of antipsychotics come into the market. Some were more similar to the others, and so there were a lot of Me Too molecules. Essentially, the molecules did not differ much in terms of their clinical efficacy. And we sort of started to understand that schizophrenia has this bedrock of genetic and environmental causes on which you have these cognitive deficits and negative symptoms. And then there's dopamine dysregulation, and positive symptoms build on top of that. So this is the overall thematic or conceptual understanding of schizophrenia. And then related to treatment, you have these what we call secondary symptoms, which are treatment-related symptoms that emerge. And our drugs only do that bit. Our drugs are only able to treat that little bit of schizophrenia. Everything else is unaddressed, right? So it's not anti-schizophrenia. We have antipsychotics. Antipsychotics treat positive psychotic symptoms, and they stop there. And so in all the excitement that we had in the previous years, it led to this moment and this humbling realization that we have done something, but we haven't really solved it. And it has improved treatment for a vast majority, but not for everyone, and not in a manner that would take away all the problems associated with the disorder. A parallel movement that has happened through all of this. So I've trained in psychopharmacology, medications for schizophrenia. So a lot of my focus is medication-based because that's how I think treatment happens. But there are other ways of understanding the history of schizophrenia and the movements in schizophrenia. So there's, of course, the psychosocial aspects, which we'll come to in a bit. But there's also how we define schizophrenia, because that shows what the biology of what we understand or a scientific understanding of the disorder. And through time, if you see that historically we had these separate unitary constructs, and they were brought together to mean this amorphous thing that we call schizophrenia. And that has moved over time, widened in 1950s and 60s, and become very narrow in 1980s with the evolution of DSM. And now we have reached a stage where we now think that it's too narrow and that schizophrenia is just too heterogeneous to be one concept. And we are now moving away to defining it actually on a dimensional level or a domain level, where we think of hallucinations as a symptom. Let's see what we can do about that, and the delusions and then emotional dysregulation and so on and so forth. So we brought it together, and now we are disintegrating again, which at least to me feels a bit circular, and then it's honestly a bit depressing. But then this is helpful also because I don't think the narrow concept helped. The narrow concept conceptualized that there will be this one drug that will treat schizophrenia, except we know now that that is not going to happen. So it's better to break it down and understand the various aspects of the disorder rather than sticking to a concept that may not be useful. And so this is our current understanding of schizophrenia. We think that genes are important. We appreciate that environment is important. And we appreciate that the stars are the hits. So this is borrowed from the cancer model. In cancer, we have what is called the two-hit hypothesis, which means that you have a change in one gene that predisposes one to cancer, and then you have the second change in that gene, and that is when cancer develops. And so this is called the multi-hit hypothesis of schizophrenia, where we think there are multiple genetic factors and multiple environmental factors that come together to manifest this illness sometime in the late adolescence and early adulthood, and that illness then evolves over time, with brain changes and changes in the rest of the body. So this is our current conceptual framework of where we are in terms of understanding how the illness happens. Okay, and this is sort of a historical background of the movements in the psychosocial and the treatment space. I'm sorry for the small text. So essentially, serendipity has been an important driver of the biological treatments. We didn't know antipsychotics would work. They happened to come by. We didn't know ECT would work. It happened to come by. And since then, we have been refining these treatments and to ensure that they have as little side effects as possible. But lately, thankfully, we are now looking more for mechanisms, looking for subtypes of schizophrenia that we can treat better using drugs. On the top side are all the psychosocial interventions. And there we have shown a lot more progress. And that's again where BCSS comes in. So you talk about educating the family. Family education has been shown in various studies as the single most cost-effective intervention that you could apply that improves treatment outcomes. Because imagine living not knowing what schizophrenia is or not knowing how it works. That can be challenging, right? And so, however, a lot of our services are not set up to provide these basic psychosocial aspects, and that's where this collaboration between government, philanthropy, and academia comes into play, because we have to make sure that the evidence-based treatments that are available are delivered in the right way. And so, this slide I borrowed from Dr. Remington, who's my mentor, who did this talk before. And so, what we need to acknowledge now is that there's been a massive investment in psychopharmacology, which has not really borne as much fruit as we would like. And therefore, it's unfortunately a failure up until now. And so we need to reconcile with that and then to decide how do we move forward, because status quo is not sustainable. The other thing that has happened is that our field has been notoriously narrow. So we prescribe these medications and we know there are side effects, but our field does not deal with those side effects very well. We have at times expected the GPs to pick up the slack, except we know now across Canada, not everyone has GPs. And when people are suffering from severe mental illnesses, their likelihood of having a GP decreases further. A lot of work across Canada has shown that access to care becomes problematic for people who have severe mental illness. And these are data out of community sites in the US, actually, which are similar to our experience. And so these are individuals, these data come from individuals who are on average 20 years of age and have experienced antipsychotic medication for less than 3 months, about thereabout, right? So very young people, very limited exposure to antipsychotics. And if you look at those dark bars, already more than half of them have bad cholesterol. Already 15% of them are showing signs of prediabetes. So this is how early these side effects or these vulnerabilities come in. But then if you look at the light bars, which are the rates of intervention, they are uniformly zero across the board. So this is how poorly we are doing. Unfortunately, there are no easy answers. And part of my role in the metabolic clinic and clozapine clinic is to change this, to drive home the fact that these are our patients, our medications, and our side effects. And so we have to be treating them. We have to be taking lead in managing some of this. So what are the next steps? So I've divided this section into conceptual, methodological, and then practical, sort of in terms of, the philosophy of it, and the treatments, of course. So conceptually, I think we have to recognize that the current concept is inadequate, especially in driving treatment. And so we have to look at individual domains. And so some of the reconceptualization that has happened is to think of it as a cognitive illness. If you do that, then you can think of newer drugs that target cognition. You can think of it as a metabolic illness, and therefore you can then generate hypotheses that can be tested. You can have metabolic relevant drugs be tried and see if that works. And on a more philosophical level, schizophrenia has been conceptualized as a disorder of self, where you lose the sense of self. And that has led to some interesting work, at least in later stages, where you treat schizophrenia from a more humanist point of view. And that has been helpful in some situations. There's also the idea to subtype schizophrenia and to use, to appreciate that, again, schizophrenia is not one concept. And so there is work now to develop genetic markers or imaging markers of, let's say, treatment resistance. So we know that some of the treatment resistance happens very early instead of, what we thought earlier happening later. And so we can offer maybe clozapine earlier to people instead of waiting for 2 antipsychotic trials to fail. And then so those kinds of approaches are possible. Big data, of course, is becoming a big thing. If we have enough data about enough outcomes, the thinking is that we will be able to personalize medicine better. We will be able to have more tailored drugs. However, this, of course, means that we should have meaningful data. Not every data is the same, right? Garbage in, garbage out. We have to have meaningful data. But if we do, then we now have the capability of understanding that better. And then beyond schizophrenia, we have to think of, and this is happening already with RDoC, which is not DSM. This is a research framework of appreciating schizophrenia. So there, like I mentioned about the dimensional perspective, to think whether you can solve hallucinations, whether you can solve delusions, whether you can solve cognitive deficits, and whether that can be a way forward instead of thinking of one drug for one illness, which is not. In terms of methodology, some of the excitement in the field is about precision trials. So these are, again, to use genetic markers or imaging markers to subtype and subclassify schizophrenia. So in a very interesting application is neuromodulation. So you can use, there are some trials where they do MRIs, and based on the MRI of that individual, they figure out where neuromodulation should be applied rather than have the same site for everyone. Another example out of mood disorder, one of our collaborators did this. They took people who had treatment-resistant depression and then did a blood test to find out if they had insulin resistance, a marker of diabetes, and or risk for diabetes. And they gave them metformin. And people who improved with metformin in terms of their insulin resistance improved in terms of their mood symptoms also. So that is an example of precision trial. So if you have illness or symptom A and you have illness or symptom B, then you are more likely to respond to drug A versus drug B. We don't think of metformin as an antidepressant drug, but in that case, it turned out to be helpful. And again, this is an approach that we take out of cancer. In cancer, you can do genetic subtyping, and based on what genetic subtype of cancer you have, or I hope none of you ever have cancer, somebody has, they can then be allotted to that treatment, right? And we know that that approach has worked for them. And so hopefully we can get there very soon. And the last two things are just to say that even when it appears that things have failed, we should stay humble because, I mean, we don't really know what this is just yet as fully as we would like. And so there is a remarkable aspect of serendipity to this. We are in a place now where information travels very quickly, research happens very quickly, And so it is very possible, and there are actually a couple of examples of this happening, that we might have new drugs where we least expected it. And so there is a reason for hope there. In terms of medications, finally, we seem to have non-D2 medications. So if you remember one of the few slides earlier, I told you that there's been no antipsychotic that does not act on the D2 receptor, right? That has been true for the last 50 years. But now it seems we have drugs like TAR1 agonist, an M1, M4 agonist, and this glycine transporter inhibition for cognition, which do not work on the D2 receptor. So this is groundbreaking in the field of schizophrenia, because for the first time, and these drugs have shown impressive results in the phase 2 trials, and I think they are now moving into phase 3. And if that's successful, they'll be launched into the market. So there's a lot of excitement around these drugs. As proof of concept, they are amazing. That something could work outside of the dopamine receptor. That is a major movement to the field. The first drug actually works, is something that is related to insulin. It improves insulin functioning in the periphery and improves dopamine functioning in the brain. So that is something that is a lot of interest to me, because I work with insulin and dopamine, and this is exciting to see. So again, it's possible in the next 10 years we'll have 2 or 3 drugs that we didn't have earlier, and that is reason for hope. And now this slide gave me the most difficulty preparing, because this is the most, we were discussing, this is the most difficult thing to change sometimes. Models of care exist, and we need to wonder whether we could do better in terms of how care is structured, how care is delivered. For one, we need significantly more investment. It goes without saying. Mental illness in general is underfunded. And if you look at all the countries in the world, I guess Canada does pretty well. But then once you are within Canada, things could be better. Things can always be better, and more investment will help drive that. We were discussing wait times post-pandemic, and some of the wait times in the ACT communities and ACT services in Toronto and around are in excess of a year. So if my child someday develops schizophrenia, and if I'm told that I have to wait a year to access ACT services, that's not acceptable. And so it requires a lot more investment to get the wait times down. There is unfortunately still medication underutilization. And so that applies to things like antipsychotics in general, but long-acting injectables in particular, clozapine in particular. Our data shows that of 100 people who are eligible to receive clozapine, at the end of 1 year, only 25% or 25 end up receiving it for various reasons. Half of them refuse, half of them get started on it, but then don't want to take it. And then so often psychiatrists or systems are not able to offer it to them for various reasons. There are roadblocks that are set up within our structures that do not allow for LAIs to be prescribed as freely as we would like, or clozapine to be prescribed as freely as we like. So it's particularly difficult to be in this position, because it's not that we have too many friends. I mean, we only have a handful of drugs. And then to be in a position where we are not even utilizing those handful of drugs, it feels particularly wasteful. And so we have been working very hard to educate everyone who would listen to us to drive up these rates. And for example, in Ontario now, the government collects data on how often LAI is used and how often clozapine is used. And so those are markers of success of program. I'm sure you have similar metrics here. And so this cannot go on. We really have to use all the tools that we have in our disposal. And then the third bit, I think, and this is, I think, the future of schizophrenia should focus on it, is side effect management, because side effects are one of the most common reasons why people go off their medications. And among them, weight gain is the most common. I mean, think of this. You spoke about the young girl who developed psychosis in that play. I haven't seen that play. But now imagine that this young person not only is dealing with psychosis, but within a year will probably have gained 10% of her body weight. I run the metabolic clinic, and there I see people who have essentially doubled themselves in a year. Now think of what that does to the self-concept. I mean, you're a young person who not only has psychosis, but does not look like anything you looked like before. And then what's the motivation to continue on the drug? And so the side effect management has to be front and center. And that's something I don't think we do very well about. And So my lab has done a lot of work in making sure that's on the forefront. And we did a session with CPA, the Canadian Psychiatric Association, 2 days ago, teaching psychiatrists how to be more proactive with this. So we have shown that a drug called metformin, again, we are back talking about metformin. It's a drug that is used for diabetes or pre-diabetes, but we have shown that in our context, it can be a very good drug to prevent these side effects. So the figure above shows that if metformin is started together with antipsychotics, it can prevent weight gain. And then we have the clozapine clinic as well. So we ran a study there. We looked at all the data in the last 7 years. I'm sorry, the figure size is small, but essentially it showed that if somebody was on clozapine and metformin, they did not gain any weight in 1 year. Whereas if somebody was on clozapine alone, they gain an average of 5 kilograms. And very interestingly, at the end of 1 year, people who were on clozapine and metformin were their continuation rates were 15% higher than people who were on clozapine alone. So if somebody was on clozapine alone, half of the times they stopped the medication. That we know is the data. But if they had clozapine and metformin, 65% of them were stayed on. So that's a 15% bump, right? And so side effect management has real implications on how people are able to take drugs and stay on drugs and do better. So that's I think a major focus of the future of schizophrenia. We have to make sure our drugs are that when it works, antipsychotics are wonderful, but they are not adequate. And so we have to help them be more adequate. We have to take away all the downsides of those drugs to the best of our abilities. Right, so to summarize, there are conceptual changes that we need to make. We need to understand that that's not one illness, there's not one cause, and therefore there's not one drug, right? So we have to be conscious and mindful about that. In terms of methodological aspects, we have to lean on technology a bit more, and hopefully the technology that's coming in. So one of my colleagues told me that now it's possible to take a rat brain, for example, and 3D image it in microscopic detail. So that has never been done before. And I'm hoping that that moves to the human world soon enough. And then we are not only able to do structural scans, but also functional scans. So we'll be able to look at the entire brain all at once at significant resolution. And hopefully that will drive a better understanding of what this disorder is. There are new medications on the horizon, and hopefully in the next 5 to 10 years, we'll have new tools that we can employ and see how they work for individuals. And of course, the models of care need to be continuously improved, and there needs to be a continuous conversation about this. As a society, we have to decide how well we want to support the people who are vulnerable, and this will need to come from that. I'll stop here and thank my mentors. A lot of this talk was developed in collaboration with Gary, and he gave a similar talk in Toronto, and I'm his emissary in a way, and trying to give this talk here. So thank you very much for listening.
That was an extremely informative presentation. So thank you so much. You talked about the importance of family involvement, which we all know in this room and online, talked about the importance of medications, which there again, we all know the importance, and also providing that hope that we need. And it just shows that we've made a lot of progress, but we still have a long way to go when it comes to our medications and our treatment for people living with severe and persistent mental illnesses. So now we get to turn the floor over to you. So the people in the room, please feel free to ask any questions that you may have. Susan, I see your hand, as well as online. So how we're going to do this is we want to make sure that we are capturing all the questions online as well. So we're going to do our best to alternate between in person and online. And we're just going to get set up here for a minute. So please, if you have any questions, feel free to write them down. Or if you are online, please include the questions in the Q&A box down at the bottom. So we'll just take a few minutes here. So the team is working hard to lots of questions, which is a good thing. Okay, perfect. Thank you. Okay, Susan, I saw your hand up first. So why don't we? Oh, okay. Okay, sure. Take it away, Susan.
Research shows us that there are better outcomes when mental health service providers cooperate with family caregivers. Yeah. They can get better information that can lead to better choices about the medical side with drugs, and also about psychosocial rehabilitation decisions. I know from having a daughter who was one of the most ill, how much it has meant to have a psychiatrist who cooperated so well. Unfortunately, as I talk to the people in the community, that kind of cooperation is really rare. Even in BC, where we have a good mental health act that allows for communication in order to provide continuity of care. I'm wondering what your ideas are about how we could help service providers feel more comfortable and skillful at establishing cooperative relationships with family caregivers. I was a teacher. We had ongoing professional development on particular topics. What can happen in the big picture to improve this level of cooperation?
Thank you. Excellent question. I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, as a clinician, it's my consistent desire and sort of I keep promoting the involvement of families, even when families don't want to be involved. We try and cajole them and bring them because, yes, outcomes are better when families are involved. Unfortunately, there are multiple factors which sometimes make that difficult. The illness itself is extremely challenging. If the individual loses insight and cannot distinguish between what's real and what's not, it's difficult to make them see, for lack of a better term, light. You know, it's like asking somebody who sometimes, let's say somebody is using substances, to just tell them to stop. Or if somebody's feeling depressed, to tell them, oh, don't be sad or don't feel anxious. I wish it were as easy as that, but it's not. And so the moment you have, in my experience, I've found more alignment between physicians and families. Right. And so because we all want the best thing to happen for the individual suffering from mental illness. But then that individual suffering from mental illness is sometimes not in a position to appreciate that this is for their benefit. And that can lead to difficult conversations. I guess you never give up hope, and you keep that door open and you keep engaging to the best of your abilities, knowing that it's not always going to work. I unfortunately don't have a better answer than that. I wish there were a drug that could improve insight, and I hope there will be a drug in the near future that would just make them understand that, yes, I have this and I need to do this, and these are the steps. I have friends, colleagues, patients who have dealt with schizophrenia for over 2 decades now, and some of them have done incredibly well. I have patients who publish in Nature, which is the best journal in science. I have people who hold down full-time jobs, entrepreneurs, physicians. And still, some of them, every time I meet them, will ask me if they need the drug. I mean, they are doing so well, and they are doing so well in part because they are on medications and they get all the support. But that feeling never goes. Could I be off this? Do I really need this? And it's as if anything we do does not take that feeling away sometimes, right? So it's a very challenging situation to be in.
Good question, Susan. Okay, we received a question from the floor. The question is it a surprise to you that new antipsychotics seem to be more effective for bipolar disorder than for schizophrenia?
Wow, that's a very interesting question. Yes and no. It sort of, and perhaps our sponsor here can shed some light on this, but it's how the framework is set up as well. It's the way FDA or Health Canada reviews applications and approves them. The way you have to demonstrate efficacy is sometimes a bit more challenging. So the more challenging the disorder, the more challenging the appreciation of efficacy, right? So if a drug is not significantly different from the gold standard treatment or the comparator treatment, then it may not qualify as a viable drug. So that's one of the aspects. The other aspect is sometimes because of the lack of progress in schizophrenia, it has inhibited investment into schizophrenia. And so that has been a bit more challenging. Hopefully, again, these new drugs make it more interesting for pharmaceutical companies to be in this space. But then historically, bipolar disorder has provided more opportunities. And so a lot of the drugs have gone there. There could be a biological perspective. And here, this is just my opinion, and I'm speculating. It's the need for antipsychotics, given the bipolarity, the fluctuating course of illness, sometimes softer antipsychotics can do better in the bipolar situation, but with schizophrenia, they may not come across as strong or effective drugs.
Thank you. Okay, online. Now, you did talk about this, the difference between the positive symptoms and the negative symptoms of schizophrenia. So the question is, one of the questions in the chat that you discussed today brought up that many patients and families are not adequately informed about the cognitive deficits that affect people with schizophrenia, so the negative symptoms. Is this something that you've observed in your experience with families?
Yes. So in fact, there are criticisms of only thinking of it as 3 domains. I mean, we think of historically schizophrenia was negative, positive, and then cognitive came in. And now we are realizing that it's not 3, it's 5 or 7 or 10 maybe, where, metabolic aspects are one of the domains, and, movement disorders are one of the domains. Sleep and anxiety is one of the domains. So a lot of these domains are affected. The problem, not the problem, the feature of schizophrenia is such that the positive symptoms are the highlight, right? When somebody seeks treatment, they are the ones that are driving the conversation, because this individual is either hearing things or saying things or believing things that are so out of the ordinary that they catch your eye. And a lot of the focus early on is to get these symptoms under control, because they drive dysfunction at that point. And so a lot of the education and the focus is around that. But yes, negative symptoms, cognitive symptoms, the other aspects that we discussed, they drive dysfunction and occupational functioning in the long run. And so they have to be discussed. It's possible sometimes, given lack of resources or time, these may not be discussed. So I can tell you what's happening in the EPI services in Ontario. We have this Navigate framework, which is borrowed from, again, the data that I showed from the US. It comes from the same center, where they have a manualized approach where they discuss each of these domains with the family present. So family, the person with psychosis, and the treatment team are all involved in a multi-week program, and we provide care for up to 3 years in that program, where each of these aspects are discussed. And we feel quite satisfied that the outcomes are good as they can be given the present circumstances of treatment and other facilities available to us. So, but yes, absolutely, it should be discussed.
Okay, question from the floor. Yes. Will you need a microphone? Perfect. Thanks, Conan.
I was wondering if you could update us or give us a little background on some of the research around the gut biome and the gut-brain axis and what's happening with that.
Yeah, no, it's an exciting area of work. To give context to that question, so our brain, we think, is driven by cells and neurotransmitters. If you look at the absolute amount of neurotransmitter present in the brain versus present in the gut is way more. And so the thoughts are that there are direct biological connections between the gut and the brain. So the overall concept is that some changes in the gut and changes in gut health, especially the microbiota that lives in our gut, can drive or be influenced by changes in the brain. And so this has been investigated in several disorders, autism, schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, several neurological disorders have come, epilepsy as well. And there are some exciting findings. It appears that there are certain kinds of bacteria that are more prevalent when somebody develops psychosis or when they are responding to treatment versus when they are not. However, this is a very, very early, these are very, very early findings, and we haven't replicated them. My own lab is involved in some of this work. We look at first episode individuals before and after they take antipsychotics, and there are some indications that there may be some changes. But again, these are very early findings, and I'm not sure what to make of them right now. In the most ideal world, you would have findings that would support a gut-mediated treatment. So you could give things like prebiotics or probiotics, and that could influence some of the symptoms, but we are not there yet. I'm also aware of products that are available that claim to do that. I'm not sure the evidence is in just yet to be able to confidently say that, yes, they work.
In general, the concept of maintaining a healthy gut biome, would you say that would be a baseline for anyone? I mean, for all of us, obviously.
Yeah.
Investigate that.
Right. Yeah, no, so the first point, yes. So it's absolutely, we should take care of our gut health. So we should eat the healthiest foods that we can, avoid simple sugars and highly processed foods. Yes. Whether you can investigate that I'm not sure, because then you will have to interpret that result, and we don't have enough data to interpret that result. So we are not there just yet. And that's another problem with schizophrenia research and the state of affairs. We don't have a diagnostic test. We are going by what is being seen and what is being told. That is not a great state to be in a branch of medicine, unfortunately, but that's how it is.
Thank you. Good question. Okay, going online. Can you please speak to the blurred lines between schizophrenia, schizoaffective disorder, and bipolar disorder? So often people have a few diagnoses before they reach the appropriate diagnosis. So how much overlap in treatments are there between these various disorders?
So there is significant overlap. So these diagnoses, like I mentioned earlier in the talk, these are not biological diagnoses. These are placeholder diagnoses. These are statistical and operational diagnoses, while hopefully we figure things out. And so these are based on field trials, clinician experiences, and asking people, well, what is schizophrenia? How do we define schizoaffective? And how do we define bipolar disorder? If you look at the genetic basis, it's all pretty overlapping. There are differences. I mean, bipolar disorder, of course, is more mood focused. Schizophrenia is more psychosis focused, and schizoaffective is somewhere in between. Every iteration of diagnostic manual changes those boundaries a bit. And therefore, it leads to this continuing conversation and confusion as to which is what. Hopefully, we are able to resolve this in the near future. But conversions are pretty common. When we have somebody with first episode psychosis, we try not to attach a label nowadays. We just call it first episode psychosis because we don't know which way it will go. And changes are common. I mean, half of the people may change their presentation, but over time, things do become more stable. And so we think of diagnosis as more longitudinal things rather than a point in place now, point in time now. So hopefully that helps, but movements are possible. That's all I can say.
That's fair. Over to the floor. Renato.
Thanks for a very interesting presentation. Question about non-dopamine medications. How excited are you about the potential for those to really turn into something useful? And just before you answer that, I just wanted to also mention that the BC Schizophrenia Society Foundation, through designated donor gifts for research, is currently working with the Michael Smith Health Research BC organization on a project that's just started, Pat, this month on the gut-brain connection. So that's a 3-year project with a research trainee, and hopefully we'll be able to update you as we go along. But anyway, about the non-dopamine medications, it sounds really interesting. Yeah,
and fantastic initiative, and all the best for that. I hope something interesting comes out of that. The non-dopamine drugs are exciting on 2 levels. One, they show initial evidence of efficacy. And so it would be very nice to replicate that in larger trials and to actually for them to come into the market. But my excitement is above and beyond that, because conceptually it changes the field, something that has not happened for 50 years. And I'm hoping that somebody sees that, a young scientist, and says, well, I can do my 3rd level and the 4th mechanism and the 5th mechanism. If you think about diabetes and hypertension and cancer, they seem to come up with at least one completely new mechanism every 5 to 10 years. And so if somebody has diabetes or hypertension, they have 5 to 10 systems to choose from in how they want to intervene. We are stuck with one, right? And so it would be so nice to move beyond that, to get to 2, 3, and 4, and 5. And I think this sort of, I think you sensed my frustration as well while I was speaking, that we have not really moved in the last 50 years. It's about time we did. We are due a major, yeah.
And we need more people like you thinking that way. Question online. You talked about the non-D2 medications that are currently in trials. So realistically, how far away do you think we're seeing these trials and these advancements right here in our province?
Yeah, no, so it will happen quickly if they are effective. So the FDA has been known to be quite proactive with this space. And so if they show efficacy, hopefully, I'm hoping that within the next 5 to 10 years, I know it's it cannot happen early enough. I mean, ideally it would have happened yesterday, but hopefully soon. Yeah.
Okay, we have about another 10 minutes left and we have a lot of questions. So I would love to have more questions from the floor before we tackle some of these. Catherine.
Thanks, Deirdre, and thanks, Dr. Agarwal. This is fabulous and fascinating. Thanks for being here. So I've got a question, but a quick preamble first. I have a granddaughter who's a DUP15 child. She has more chromosomes, less chromosomes than she should have, which adds a lot of things to her, epilepsy and autism. She's just gone on, well, not just 6 months ago, a very, very strict keto diet. And she's come off 4 medications and has no seizures now. She's 7. She's been getting seizures since she was a baby. So that is so interesting, the gut brain connection. So jumping off from that, I don't know how we can I don't know how we can entice my son, who likes to eat things like jelly beans and cheesies, to go on a diet like that. But there's a new, of course, the clozapine plus metformin, that sort of thing. But there's a new drug, a new diet injection that people are cosmetically taking to lose weight. I don't know if that would just be it's just going to make people lose weight, but not change that gut brain effect. Will it? Can you speak to that? Will it make any difference?
Yeah, so we are. I'm the co-PI on a trial which examines that in schizophrenia. So we have in the metabolic clinic, we have people on metformin, and when they stop responding or they haven't responded to metformin, we don't have too many answers. So we have funding from CIHR to examine the drug that you refer to is called semaglutide. It goes by Ozempic or Wegovy, various names. But so we are examining semaglutide in that context, and our questions are exactly that. So what does it do? So we are interested, of course, in weight and other metabolic outcomes, but we are also examining cognition, including social cognition, and various other lab measures to see, well, what is it that this drug brings about? And so this metabolic reconceptualization of schizophrenia is again exciting, and I just would like to take this idea further. We want like 100 different things to be studied in schizophrenia. What has happened in the recent past is that we have been too focused on just one thing, and that has not led to dividends. We want some productive chaos in all of this, people doing all the various things that they do, scientists just running with it, and hopefully 1 or 2 of these ideas will work. So the wider and the sort of the more open-minded we are about discovering what schizophrenia can be is likely to be helpful. And so it's going to feel like a bit of blue sky investment for a bit, but then hopefully it will lead to good returns.
Thanks, Catherine. Okay, online, I see the minister. Thank you again. No, don't apologize. Thank you for your time. Thank you for being here. Thank you. Online question. There's lots of questions around side effects.
Right.
So for family members who are advocates for their loved ones' medical care, how do you recommend approaching the discussion around side effects and additional medications? It's a big one.
Yes. So again, I wish there were simpler answers. The thing is to advocate, to bring the side effects to the attention of the treating physician. If you have a GP, then the physician, the psychiatrist, and the GP, but whoever will listen to you, it sometimes, and then again, we are working in that space. We are trying to educate far and wide in terms of telling people about these options and to encourage people across the spectrum, from GPs to psychiatrists, to take ownership of this and to manage it, right? However, you have to appreciate that people are sometimes reluctant to change, and people sometimes don't want to try new things, even if those new things have been shown to be effective, right? So it's a process of continuous advocacy and asking for it. Having said that, a lot of the side effect management drugs are very safe. And so there is value in trying them, and there's value in asking if they could be of help. Yeah.
Thank you. And I'm getting the countdown cue, but I have to ask this question. For family members who are in the audience today or online, and they're just beginning their journey with their loved one living with a severe and persistent mental illness, what advice, what tips would you say to those family members?
All right, hang in there. I mean, you have one of the most difficult jobs there is. I mean, it's not. I try to make it personal every time I think about schizophrenia. I think about what if my daughter were to develop it and how I would react to that, and how I would go about that, and it's not great. It's a very, very difficult situation to be in, and it's nice to have community. It's nice to have help. It's nice to have a village to help you deal with that. There's also hope. There's needs to be appreciation that not all outcomes are bad. If you look at schizophrenia overall, about 1/3 of our patients don't do very well, but 2/3 do reasonably well. And among those 2/3, 1/3 do spectacularly well, right? So they are about 1/3 of our patients are able to hold down jobs, are able to lead meaningful lives, full lives. And it's important to recognize that, because oftentimes people who are in tertiary centers, academics, people such as myself, we only see a flavor of schizophrenia, the more severe kind, and that colors our perception. But if we look at schizophrenia overall in general, it is the most severe illness there is in mental space, but there is hope. And then it's important to channelize that hope and to be open. When it comes to family, there's a lot of research that shows that positive emotions, positive expressed emotions improve outcomes, whereas negative expressed emotions actually lead to relapses. So we are thinking about criticality, over-involvement, and in general, a hostile environment. These three things have been shown to increase relapse rates, whereas positive regard and open conversations and sort of warmth has been shown to reduce it. So those are the things you're aiming for. It's easier said than done. I appreciate that, but that's what you're aiming for.
Wow. I can feel everyone is also feeling the exact same way that I am, that was just an extremely informative presentation. You answered so many questions. There's still many questions here to go. We could talk to you for hours, but unfortunately we have come to an end. So before we leave, I just really want to acknowledge Minister Whiteside for attending this event. Christine Tapp, thank you again for being here. We really do appreciate all the support, not only for being here today, but your ongoing support from the provincial government. So thank you for that. I also want to acknowledge Melanie. Thank you for speaking. Thank you for being here today. Dana and Ahmed, thank you for all your support. Abby, for being here today and your ongoing support as well. For all of you board members, my amazing team that is here in front of me today and online, you are incredible. You inspire me every day. And like I always say, the provincial office is here to support our frontline team. And to my provincial office, you rock. There's no other way to describe it. You guys are the best. And just thank you for everything that you do. You go above and beyond every single day. This is not a 9-to-5 job. So thank you for all that you do. Garrett, thank you for your behind the scenes support of BCSS, for all you do for BCSS families. Congratulations again on your award. Thank you for being here today, along with your lovely wife, Leslie. And to all you family members, keep going. As you said, there's hope, and it takes a village, and I'm so glad you're a part of this village with us. Thanks for being here today.